All right. It looks like we are able to get connected to you right now. After a long absence from the live sphere, my friend Greg and I have decided today's adventure is about connecting with the audience directly. Your comments will appear on the screen and we can address you directly. And we just really wanted to get together and liven up the adventure and connect to more of you and really just pour hope and vulnerability and strength and optimism and concern and all of the human shit into the world, that in a way that only Greg and I do uniquely to ourselves. And so I want to welcome my friend Greg Wilker to the party. And I'm grateful for everyone that hears this. Just remember, it's up to you. Welcome, Greg.
So thank you. And this is just a special episode we're doing. This won't be like an official podcast episode. This is live stream only, social media only. Social media.
Some of you will see it. Some of you won't see it.
Hey, so I have a question for you because I know you're really passionate, enlivened by it is time to be active in, I don't know if resistance is the right word, but change to the way things are going in our social political climate right now. And I'd like to hear more about that.
Awesome. When I was 7, I marched in my first anti-war rally in the San Francisco Bay Area to protest the Vietnam War. And over the next 2-3 years, I had a front row seat to what many people call the counterculture revolution of the 60s. And I was lucky enough to be raised by parents who had the desire to really shift into a new way of being as we entered into what was then referred to as the age of Aquarius. And I think a lot of us felt like the hippie dream sort of became deflated and fell into something called the me generation. And then after that, there's this sort of cynicism that developed around the idea of a utopian revolution. Peace became a kind of catchphrase, but had no teeth. And maybe that's the way it should be. And I think some of what my parents were concerned about and their peers were concerned about, and all sorts of people have been concerned about in the intervening years, now that it's 2025, was this idea of slipping into more and more of a corporate controlled sort of police state. And I think that we have the strongest evidence of that as of yet to date in our current social climate. And that it's operating under, quote, the color of law.
That's interesting.
Right? And
Is
so
that a real, did someone, like you said, in quote, the color of law, did President Trump say that? Is that his words, color of law?
No, that's my assessment.
Oh, okay. I've never heard that phrase before, the color of law.
Well, it's basically, there's things that are happening that certain people feel really disturbed by and consider aberrant. And when you drill down into their justification, there is sufficient reference to law that allows it, right? But it doesn't necessarily make us feel good about what it is that's happening. And so there's this a lot of mirroring of old police state tactics. A lot of people in certain circles have said we've arrived at a police state. We're there. There's basically very little thin veneer between where we are now and fascism in the United States. I belong to a group of men that are considered, quote, both sides of the aisle, whatever that frickin' means. And we call ourselves men of reason. And so we talk every week about this. And I get a lot of balanced viewpoints. And what I see in circles where it tends to be more polarized is, one group is like, this is what I voted for, and another group is, we got to do something about this. This is fascism. And as we listen to historians, fascism isn't something you can vote away.
Yeah.
And so that leaves us with a question. And I'll frame it in the Buddhist framework. What is right action in a situation like this? It's not necessary that Buddhism be the ultimate decider in this case, but I think that's a great way to frame the question. And so I'm asking myself, aside from all of the different sort of mediums of resistance that we see, which tend to be co-opted and are ineffective in stemming this tide, what other kinds of action become valuable? And so I've been sitting with that question a lot.
I love that, because one of my analogies that I have in my heart with things is I think about the trains that were going to the concentration camps during World War II. And there's people on the sidelines who could be angry and adamant and have all these facts proving that these trains are going to concentration camps. There could be the Pollyanna people that go, no, that would never happen. And it doesn't matter. Both those actions, the train keeps rolling by. And I'm interested in what dismantles the tracks.
Well, I'm going to just turn the question right back to you,
What
because I'm not the authority here. I'm not the guest. This is us having a conversation, right?
Right.
So, right. And what do you think? I mean, and are you even sort of framing it right? I don't see any concentration camps yet.
Well, if I was going to write a story, a dystopian story, and have an evil dictator, there's elements happening that I would put in my story. Like, they got into office and cemented over the rose garden. They took down the paintings of the former leaders they didn't like and stashed them away. You know, there's elements in our life happening that I would put in my fictional story. So a friend of mine yesterday was texting me all this chaos. Like right now, I see a lot of my liberal friends posting images of Governor Newsom all buffed out and riding an eagle. And I'm like, what is different between that image and the image of Trump all buffed out riding an eagle? Like, you're taking the same energy and calling it something different. And I texted him, like, you know, I'm not playing this game. And he was like, why not? It's fun. And I just left it alone. And before that, I texted him, interesting game. The only way to win is not to play at all.
Yeah, that's from that movie.
Right. War Games. And I think for me, like I think for me, I'm taking the advice I gave to him, which was do your research, contemplate, think for yourself. I'm for freedom. And I may be wrong. Think for yourself. Don't take my word. And I said, and he goes, no, you know, I want to hear more. And so I said, all right, here's a hint. Media, both social and corporate, is muddy water. So I think the three people that are on an overpass with a sign that says support freedom or protect our immigrants or things like that, that is an action of value, even though it might seem of no value. The value I give it is just like with my alcoholic friends, who now and then in our friendship, I'd say, hey, have you ever given some thought to the abuse of this alcoholism? And I'm not asking them to change. I'm just asking for a moment of contemplation of what is going on, what you're doing. And I think that sign on the overpass gives everyone driving by a moment of contemplation. Let me check in.
Well, we've been successfully navel gazing since the Buddhism took over the west coast of California in the late 70s and seems to be progressing quite well now. We're
I
very good
agree.
at hot navel gazing and navel gazing under guises of various spiritual gurus. And oh my God, the books that have been written and the podcasts that are getting written. And that's really actually important. And what I'm sort of being funny here, but I want to
I
say
like
something that actually is serious.
it.
Um, one of the most revolutionary acts that you can do is not to let the aggressor infiltrate your thinking at the level that you become perturbed and provocable or feel oppressed and powerless in the face of it. Because one of the things that propaganda is designed to do, as they say, is to win the hearts and minds, but it's also to destroy the hearts and minds of anyone who would resist or would not be in alignment with the particular focus. So self-care, rest, exercise, and then community, they're really important. And not necessarily just the idea of action. Collective action is important, but it is a revolutionary act to be able to actually calm your nervous system and be ready for the ability to continue to have stamina and persevere, really. And one of the great quotes I love is something Marley said. Bob Marley said, he said, "He who fights and runs away lives to fight another day." There's an element here of managing your nervous system, of taking steps, but then also being alive. Now, that didn't stop Hitler, right? There was a level at which we had to cathect a whole human response to stop the tide of fascism in the 40s, you know?
You know what comes to mind is with Gandhi, you hear a lot about the peaceful resistance, but it was peaceful only on the side of Gandhi, and they bravely took the blows. Like I've heard of that one thing where they came up to the gates and the soldiers just beat them down, and they knew that was going to happen. They also knew that the media and the people, the word would get out of what happened and it would aid their cause.
There is a historian who's been doing a lot of social media posts, a guy named Tad Stomer. And he has really laid out a very complex and nuanced analysis. So if you're at all inclined to go to TikTok or Instagram, TikTok, the
If you
social media that's real refreshing your breath. No.
Refreshingly elite.
Anyway, Tad Stomer, I think I'm getting his name right, has really offered a lot of perspective and insight that I think is relevant. And that's been both inspiring, perturbing, and given me pause to reflect. We will be very shortly facing important choices in our culture, not just around the issue of a quote strongman and police state ideas, but also around the way that we allow our consciousness to be machined. That's a great way to put it. Our consciousness is being machined already. In fact, we're currently broadcasting on the networks that are doing that, right? And then we have this artificial intelligence wave that is now swelling and moving through. And, one of the things you might want to do if you really want to learn more about how that might work is you could go to AI-2027.com. That's AI-2027.com. And there's a whole white paper there about how things are going to play out over the next 2 or 3 years that could be very uncomfortable to read for you. Not saying they're right? But the key is we are at an inflection point in human history. the the multiple gods and goddesses of the universe have now called us all in, and we're making choices, right? How are you going to spend your time? How are you going to spend your attention? Where is your heart, right? What are you fearing? What are you, you know, devoted to, right? So for me, my core values are I want everybody that I know or everybody that wants to know me that I don't yet know to be able to step into a field that's reflection, an emanation of the core values that I got from that experience when I was marching in the protests in the late 60s and early 70s with my parents, which is that there's a new possibility that's being born. Now, it's been 60 years since that, 55, depending on whether you count from 65 to 1970. So what is exactly being born? I mean, how long is it, is the gestation period? How long is the birth? Well, when you think about 26,000 year cycles, as far as planetary cycles, 60 years is pretty short. And, human evolution is pretty short. And as far as governments go, the United States government is relatively young. And 2026 is the quote 250th birthday of this great nation. But
it's great again.
We're being brought into this framework of, reaffirming or reconfiguring how we do this thing together. One of the most important things that I've learned from my father, God bless you, Joel Went, is he said, what in the face of all this hard choices, all these challenges, all these moral dilemmas that we're all being brought into as a result of our collective karma and our individual karma, what most people want is just warm tea and company. And it's important that we create that space for each other, because when we're staring at these devices or looking at our computer screens, our brains think that that's what's happening, but it's not really happening at the organic level. And when I find myself sitting with my friends or playing music or these other things, that's when I realize, oh my God, right? Like, this is great. And one more thing, I liken it to the difference between eating frozen broccoli and fresh organic broccoli. Like, it's still broccoli on a certain level, but it's not the same. Like, the way my body feels afterwards is completely different.
Yeah, even broccoli you've grown is different than broccoli organically bought at the grocery store.
Yeah.
One thing with social media that I see potential with, like, I don't know if friend's the right word, though I consider her a friend, but would she anyway, Bridge. And I see what she's been doing on Facebook the past couple of days is creating community, calling people in, and a space where one can be vulnerable, afraid, weak in community. And I believe the hope is to be strengthened by that. So such a calling in I see as a temporary, because I don't think we want to dwell in a place of weakness and victimhood. But sometimes it's strengthening and healing to be amongst those that are in that space and help each other strengthen and rebirth in a sense. So that's one positive I do see with social medias. With consciousness, you can have community. And I guess just for all of us, to not stay in that victim triangle, to really stay conscious. And like, I love what you said earlier, to be free in our consciousness.
Be free in our consciousness. Yeah. And for those of you who are listening who don't understand the victim triangle, there's a Dr. Cartman in the 70s created this diagram that talks about different roles that people play when they're in drama together, stress-inducing drama. And subsequently, I've read several books as part of my coaching training. One of the things we can do is we can heal that dynamic and elevate it to another layer of observational insight. And what I think, from what I know about Bridge's work, and I just want to say, like, I left posting in Facebook in January of 2025. And so the only things I've been really seeing there are related to Illumination, the band. But I did recently poke my face back in there. I put my face back in the book, so to speak, because I wanted to see what was happening. And I knew, like, with certain people, I won't hear anything unless I look, right? Bridge was one of those. And I did take the time to reply to one of her posts, but I haven't really read anything recently. And, here's the thing: Instagram and Facebook are both Meta. And we know that Meta is taking people's communications and training AI with them. So my commitment to being away from them is hard, and it's also an important part of my core values. So, and now our stream is not getting as far as it might. Nonetheless, one of the things that I learned as a result of looking through that window this week was that we lost another. Well, we became aware of the fallacy of another artist and spiritual leader who, it was heart-wrenching for everyone to experience this, who loved him, because it reminded us that we can't always trust even the greatest expressions of
I don't know what
people.
you're talking about.
So several
I
women
think we were
came
talking
forward
about
this
Taylor
week.
Swift.
Several women came forward this week and talked about behaviors that were grooming behaviors, and basically borderline sexual assault, or maybe directly sexual assault, by a gentleman named Michael Ferranti. And
Ah,
Michael's music has been full of hope and community and bringing people together and being an elevated human. And so to have that experience go through our collective heart center of it has been really hard for people. Women are angry again about things like this, and they should be. And we're seeing again that behind the veil of supposedly spiritually developed men, there lurks this sexual predator instinct that even wait, let me finish. And it's not just from, there have been several examples of this. Bikram, right? One of my most favorite spiritual teachers, a guy named Chogyam Trungpa, also had sexual picadillos. That's a good word, I don't know, with his students. And
wait, I love
it's
that.
a violation, right?
Sexual
And then
picadillos.
his son, who had inherited the Shambhala lineage, which is a powerful spiritual tool, he also was outside what we consider reasonable and safe behavior for spiritual leaders involved with their students in a sexual way. And it's not just these folks. There's been others that, in the music community, there's been tons of them, people we don't even know about. So it's hard when we've got this really horrible, oppressive police state thing happening. And then the people that we thought were our community leaders, our spiritual leaders, also aren't trustworthy when it comes to sexual energy. And we have to clean that up. And men need to work with men to do that. The women can't be the only people holding us accountable. So that's on my mind as well. Like, so that just is a reflection of what I said earlier, which was we're at this apex of human evolution where we're all being confronted with our choices and having to figure this stuff out together.
I'm reminded of an experience I had 6-7 years ago with someone who was a friend at the time, and I was texting in a sexual flirtatious manner, but to me it was light and joking, and there were other women in my life where it was fine with. It triggered this person, and I got a harsh slap back, very angry. And there was this element of like, I wasn't literally coming on to you, it was playing. And I mention that because there was an innocence to my action where it almost, what, not almost, in my experience, the punishment didn't fit the crime. It was certainly a realm for communication, but part of what happened is the anger was so intense, there was no room for communication. And I also, in my own learning of my sexual energy, just recently, I've come to a place of feeling excitement, sexual excitement, and not needing to do anything with it, being like, oh, I could just feel this and be okay with that. Like, it's not a call for action. I can experience the joy of it without an action needing. And I think it's a realm we don't talk about. That's part of the thing. This play is happening at College of Marin. It's rehearsals start Monday, and I got a role with it's a male king who I believe, I don't know the exact plot yet, but there is a male who rapes a woman, and part of in the plot, the story is he has these feelings and he doesn't know the right action with them. He is at a loss. So yes, there is a violence, but there's also kind of how Thich Nhat Hanh wrote that poem about the pirates who raped that young girl, but he wrote it from the perspective of acknowledging the pain the pirates were in to be able to take suction action. And from my understanding, that was kind of what started him being known on a world platform, because it was such a unique look at a very violent action, acknowledging the pain of all involved, including the oppressors. And
yeah, this is important, but it also begins to tread into the dangerous waters of spiritual bypassing and avoidance of the issues. I've pulled up the poem and could read it if you'd like that. But
let's do it. That sounds great.
Okay, but before we do that, I just want to qualify this is that men have to get better at keeping their energy clean and not allowing these deeper, darker rape culture, piracy culture urges to be thought of in terms of acceptable or creating any kind of justification or perception of justification for transgressions and the darker side of patriarchy. Like we had Ken Blackman on a few weeks back, and it was really clear that men have a lot of work to do around this. And so we as men need to find ways to call in our brothers and our acquaintances in the moment when it's happening. And one of the great ways to do that is just say, hey, let's think about this for a moment. Is that really the way you want to show up right now? Right? Hey, let's think about this for a moment. Is that really the way you want to show up right now? Like just that is enough of an interrupt and a starter of a conversation. And we need to do that a lot more. Like whatever you think is enough, multiply that by 100. Because we have to own the labor of fixing this as men. We can't just wait for the next wave of Me Too to sort of shame men into this compliance statute and then have it drive it further underground as if we're can find another way to get away with stuff like this. cleaning it up actually means engaging with it, and men need to do that in groups together and really get a handle on where sexuality becomes darkness and becomes toxicity, and
And
not
I
justify it, right?
and I right, and I believe, like, part of what I really respect with Nicole, I was contemplating on my drive down the coast on Monday, Nicole
Stay down.
statement about, yeah, about rape and how it was a choice. And I was thinking, okay, so let's say I'm in prison at San Quentin and some guy grabs me, throws me against the wall, and he's gonna fuck me. Like, can I choose to accept it, to not be raped? And here's the thing,
Okay,
what I
hold on. Like, this is super problematic
it wait,
to
but
me.
hold on.
Is that really how you want to show up in this moment right now,
Yeah,
Greg?
it
Okay,
is,
why?
because this is the deep well. This is the close, if not the kernel of conversation to clean up the mess. Like, I think part of why these heightened spiritual leaders get fucked up in this sexual chaos is this isn't an open conversation. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying Nicole has introduced an idea that's allowing me to dive super deep into contemplation of sexual energy and take an honest fucking look and take some real responsibility of personal choice in moments.
So, just to be clear, you didn't quote her very well, and the implication of what you're saying is that the person who is being victimized in that moment should just change their relationship to being victimized sufficiently enough for it to not be traumatizing for them. And I
Not a
think that's
should.
a
No, wait, no,
misappropriate.
not a
Okay.
should. Not a should. The choice is always there.
Yeah, I don't agree. I don't think there's a choice there at all. I don't think that contemplation is worthy. I don't think it's justifiable, and I don't think it works. You're just alleviating the transgressor in that. And you're placing the victim inside of this idea of victim mentality being a weaponization that you're going to use against them. That if they just change their attitude about what's happening to them, that'll be enough for them to escape all the trauma. And I think that is another way of misguiding the spiritual precepts that we're learning in this modern era. That I'm going to say a hard no. I don't care where you are, anybody that is violating you in your body, it's about them. And they need to stop it immediately, and they need to be held accountable. And as far as healing yourself after something like that, yeah, finding ways to alchemize that experience so that it doesn't just continually traumatize you is an important process, but not in the moment. Acquiescence and surrender as a strategy for that, no.
I would ask you to look at your own hardness in this moment. And the story that comes to my mind is one of my favorite Zen stories of the fierce samurai who was going through Japan, just slaughtering villages and raping and pillaging. And he's coming to this one town, and they hear that he's coming, and they're all going to leave. And they tell the monks in this monastery on the hill that this guy's coming, and everyone bounces except this one monk. And he sits in the middle of the road, in the middle of the town. And the samurai comes riding up, fierce, dust all over the place, jumps off the horse and runs up to the guy. And he goes, "Don't you know who I am? I could run this sword through you and I won't bat an eye." And the monk calmly looks at him and says, "Don't you know who I am? You could run that sword through me and I won't bat an eye." I don't believe that story promotes rape as a right action. I believe it's an empowering story that within us all is that bodhisattva light that is unharmed and unmoved, complete love and pure peace in every moment, regardless of the outer exterior.
This is the kind of spirituality that is at the root of this problem. And this is why it's problematic for male spiritual leaders who want to play around the edge you're playing with, because it's so slippery into justification and this idea that agency is the responsibility of the victim, and how they approach this is something that they can shift, and it doesn't have to be an impact in the way that you're describing. And while I recognize the theoretical ideal that you're talking about, it is literally the core of what this problem is that when we take this attitude, it becomes a permission slip. And it makes it like, well, that's just their karma, or they can choose how they relate to this. And it enables all kinds of horrible behaviors. And this kind of thinking is exactly the problem that we're talking about. You can't use spirituality and these kinds of tales and turn them into justification for making it the responsibility of a victim to alchemize their wounding. It's not true.
Maybe it's a good time to read that poem.
Okay. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote a poem, and the poem is Call Me by My True Names. And just to be clear, I have not read this poem. I don't know its content, but I'm about to read it. Do not say that I'll depart tomorrow, because even today I still arrive. Look deeply. I arrive in every second. To be a bud on a spring branch, to be a tiny bird with wings still fragile, learning to sing in my new nest, to be a caterpillar in the heart of a flower, to be a jewel hiding itself in a stone. I still arrive in order to laugh and to cry, in order to fear and to hope. The rhythm of my heart is the birth and death of all that are alive. I am the mayfly metamorphosing on the surface of the river. I am the bird which, when spring comes, arrives in time to eat the mayfly. I am the frog swimming happily in the clear pond. I am also the grass snake who, approaching in silence, feeds itself on the frog. I am the child in Uganda, all skin and bones, my legs as thin as bamboo sticks. And I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I am the 12-year-old girl, refugee on a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. I am a member of the Politburo with plenty of power in my hands, and I am the man who has to pay his debt of blood to my people, dying slowly in a forced labor camp. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes flowers bloom in all walks of life. My pain is like a river of tears, so full it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and laughs at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up, and so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion. Thich Nhat Hanh is a world-renowned Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk, teacher, author, poet, and peace activist. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King Jr. So the seed question that goes with this is, what does compassion, encompassing all its true names, mean to you? Can you share a personal story of a time you were touched by such compassion, either within you or from someone else? What practice helps you find such compassion? So that's the poem. The challenge of composure and compassion in the expression of aggressive male sexuality, calibration, as Nicole put it in her work. It is work that is much needed and as yet much undone. Otherwise, we wouldn't see the continual manifestations of rape culture and of the falling of spiritual leaders who, in the shadows, are unable to have a relationship with this dark part of self, this sexual aggressor. I know this part myself. I'm not sitting on a high horse saying I am not this, but I am choosing to take, obviously now, a public stance on how this is. And just to be clear, Greg and I had no idea where this conversation was going to go. We chose, as it says in the thing below, to step into adventure. It awaits. Courage, our guide, and kindness, the currency of human connection. I wrote that. Greg didn't write that. So he sort of agreed to have that be part of the conversation. We can do better. We must do better. What else do you want to add after the poem? What happened for you as you read the poem, Greg? Or I read the poem?
What resonated for me is what I was attempting to communicate was every individual to be conscious that they are the victim and they are the creator of violence in every moment. We're never separate. And absolutely abhor the experience of pain. And that doesn't separate me from being the one creating that pain.
Well, I think I want to validate the philosophical point you're making about oneness. And I also want to point out that that idea is an enabler of abuse. That, again, we're dealing with this idea where, because of a philosophical point of view about oneness, we are allowing just the slightest bit of justification and removal of the responsibility of the perpetrator to exist in the conversation. And I will just state clearly and that is not my observation of the value of that teaching. That the responsibility for us to clean up the things that fuel the justifications for male sexual dominating power abuse through the guise of spiritual teachings is problematic at best and abhorrent. And what it takes is for us to stop micro justifying these kinds of things through the lens of philosophical discourse. It's actually more important for us to take a firm stand and say, I reject the teachings of oneness in the instance where suffering is being caused by a perpetrator. And that doesn't make it, escapable. This idea that, you can just bypass this pain and suffering of someone who's victimized in this way.
I'm not asking for bypassing. Instead, I'm asking us to be empowered so that everyone, in any instance where they are about to be hurt, they, in a Zen manner, take that energy and return it tenfold to the person.
So here's my request. Speak from the perspective of the person who is the perpetrator in that case, instead of from what the victim quote should do in order to, right? Speak from that perspective. What should the perpetrator be doing?
Well, so that's a great question. So at the beginning of this, we were talking about our political thing and Trump. And personally, I think on a one-on-one, Trump, the perpetrator,
Perpetrator. Blah, 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 blah.
perpetrator is incapable of changing his actions right now. And that bitch needs a good slap to the face.
So
I mean,
you're avoiding my question. You've
no,
changed the locus around Trump. Put it back on sexual perpetrator and talk about
well,
that.
okay,
And about
so
men managing their sexual energy. We're not
no,
uncurable. We don't have, again, it's not a fucking excuse
well, let me
that
ask
you're
you
not
this.
changeable, that he's
I'm,
not going to change, or that I'm not changeable.
do
Like,
you think there's merit to separating male in this sexual dialogue and just concentrating on the male in this aspect?
it just feels like avoidance to me. Everything you've
I'm
said
asking the
since I stopped talking about it feels like avoidance. I'm asking you to
I'm
apply the
asking
same philosophical point of view to how the perpetrator should shift their awareness of oneness.
well, if they truly have an awareness of oneness, they know that causing pain to another is causing pain to themselves. And it's not a philosophical thing, it's felt, it's experienced.
Got it. I think you're right on with that. But I got upset and frustrated because the habit that we have to go immediately to the victim in the thing and say that they should shift their point of view about their victimhood is part of the problem. It's not untrue necessarily, but the emphasis on it and being the first thing is part of the problem that perpetuates this idea. We've got to put the focus on our own unwillingness to believe in the power of our shift, the potential of our shift, and then escaping all of the little ways that we secretly justify it as if we're just that way, or it's not something we can control, or all these little slippery ways that we enable perpetrators to have that kind of point of view.
There's so much going on in my head hole. It was hard for me to
How about
talk.
your heart hole right now? How's that doing?
There's a hole in my heart. And so um f- for me, examining a situation from the place of the victim and how can I, as the victim, be empowered in the moment is what my imaginative process is in those scenarios I'm putting out there. Um,
It feels
and
like that could be your version of compassion. It's like, hey, let's address the wound, right? Like, here's the wound. Let's look at that. Let's see what can heal the wound, right? I can see that.
it hits me wrong in my gut to have this conversation solely male based as the
Perpetrator.
perpetrator, as the pepperhead, as the perpetrator of violence and wrong action. It, and as I say that to you, I do not have any sense of how to be more inclusive in what you're talking about. Because absolutely, I recognize the patriarchy of our social system that has existed for centuries and the pain that women have experienced in the violence of this patriarchy.
Got it. I can relate to that on a certain level because I noticed in the past when I've been confronted with similar issues that my own discomfort around being male surfaced as a way to like I this isn't just about men. It's not all men. Like there's a lot of reasons to want to get off the discomfort of owning this as a human being, as a male human being. So I can relate to that. And what I've found over and over again when I've had conversations with people who are willing to challenge me and have me contemplate at a deeper level is that testosterone is a bitch, and it's where most of the problems are coming from.
No, it's
Aggression,
not a bitch. It's the opposite.
that was my form of joke, and it worked. You laughed. Hopefully, everybody else in the audience who heard it laughed. And just so you know, the audience right now, it says 0 on our thing. So we're just talking to ourselves, basically. But regardless, I think the acknowledgement that I too have felt the discomfort of having to confront the way this shadow lives in me and the way that I want to change the conversation when it's pointing at me as having to do something and is really it's important to recognize that and then move deeper into the discomfort instead of into the philosophical point of view that allows me to feel less discomfort. And then particularly like I said at the beginning, this idea that we as men actually as in addition to confronting our own tendencies in this regard, we have to confront each other. And one of the problems of that is that we use shame as a weapon and we justify it as if shame somehow is an effective tool for creating difference in this regard. And what I found is that shame actually just buries it deeper for people. It becomes more hidden and less willing to be worked with. And that the real magic to opening the door is to actually be open and allow the awareness that we all carry some of this inside us as
Wait,
men.
wait.
And
I need more explanation about your shame. Like I'm not clear on what you're
when we use shame as a weapon,
right. So what would that be?
you tell me.
I don't know.
You do.
Um,
How would shame be used as a weapon when you're talking about
well, I
someone who
suppose like so this see I suppose like while you were wearing a skimpy skirt and no top, you were asking to be raped. Is that what you
no, when
mean?
you talk to the perpetrator and you try to tell the perpetrator about the incorrect actions they're taking, what would
Oh,
be
and
the
you
method? You
try to
shame them
wep
for it.
right. Like you piece of shit.
Right.
Fuck you. You should
Right.
burn in hell.
Right. Right. And
You
so
are
to some
abhorrent.
degree they're deserving, right?
Right.
Male perpetrators of sexual violence, quote, are deserving of retribution on another level. The question is shame an effective tool in recalibrating the way men behave? And how do we as men learn to shift that energy from beyond shame and guilt to a kind of open discussion, an acknowledgement that we all carry this testosterone driven evolutionary sort of predilection towards sexual violence. And then now we're in an open conversation where no one is superior to the other person. But we all then have to confront the fact that we are potential perpetrators. And what do we do to shift that energy in ourselves? And how do we hold each other accountable? So, what I was saying was that when we use shame and punishment as the main means of addressing that with our fellow brothers and male relatives, we actually drive the shadow deeper. We make it more hidden. And then under that compression, it becomes more possible for it to act out in the shadows and in the darkness. And when we have more willingness and more receptivity to actually dealing with, well, what does this mean? What about this aggressive sexual energy that I carry? What can I do with it when I'm feeling it? And you mentioned that you've come to a place, this is about 10 or 15 minutes ago, you said, what I notice in myself is that when I'm having that experience, I have a choice about how I carry it.
Well, it's not even aggressive energy. It's an experience of sexual titillation and not needing that to be anything else than an experience that's happening inside me.
Right. The way I relate to that is I really love feeling that. And I think if we talk about our hormonal structure, we get dopamine from that.
Mhm.
And then it cascades and we want more and we get like and one of the things that we live in a culture of advertising and porn where what we're doing is being bombarded with those kinds of stimulants, and it's basically, sex crack and male brains. And so when I feel that, I don't want to shame it. It's there for a reason, quote unquote. God put it there for a reason. But I do need to harmonize it, to breathe beauty into it as opposed to darkness and violence into it. And that's the work. We're not doing a great job of helping men have impulse control or helping men who feel powerless in the face of these yearnings. Testosterone's a bitch, man, I'll tell you. Right? How do we help men alchemize that stuff?
Well, so the Om practice was a wonderful practice for me to learn how to accept no, not have my ego involved with that experience of hearing no, instead to just like, oh, it's a no. And it's a no for this moment. And it doesn't mean that the next moment will change. It also doesn't mean I'm going to keep pushing. Like, I think that's part of that. I think part of that sexual testosterone, the male energy of sex, is very driven and animalistic and mastered. It's a wonderful thing for everyone to enjoy. And part of the mastery is like, is learning how to put on the brakes, or just like I said, to not need an action, which usually involves someone else. Sometimes you could be masturbation as an action, but to not involve an action, to feel that drive and that energy, and like even have a nuclear experience that you can just be with.
Yeah, and when we put our conscious attention on what do I do with this feeling or this
Right.
urge?
Right.
How can I turn it from something dark and aggressive or even just benignly distracting into something useful? And we've seen how different religions, like Christianity, for instance, it's like, no, only in marriage to make children, right? And then in other arenas like Tantra, it's like, no, you have a deep relationship with it. You understand the ebb and flow of it. You understand where it's useful and where it's harmful, right? So we live in a culture, especially in the West, where we are sublimating, we're pushing down this sort of elemental part of our natures, and we aren't given the tools to meet it and switch its nature into something useful. And so if you're a man who happens to come across this conversation, my wish is for you to become more curious about how your sexual energy is impacting the people around you in ways that you're not conscious of, and how its impulse control is problematic for you as well as people around you. And what would happen if you could find a way to harness that energy and put it towards something generative, iterative, and for the benefit of culture and for health and for your life. And it's not for me to tell you what that way is, right? We all, right? Um, and, you know, this sort of leads us back to what do we do with our current cultural condition where we have a dominating male, oppressive, violent prone, coercive, you know, police state emerging. Um, that warriorship to counteract that might be a place to put your berserker energy. But even that just perpetrates more violence. Like if right now someone shot some ICE agents while they were trying to kidnap somebody, it would create more chaos, not less.
What
So
I
that's also not the right action either.
Yeah, but check out that Chinese gentleman that stood in front of the tanks and the power. And that's what I picture. You don't shoot the ICE agent, you stand between them and whoever they're attempting to get. And part of what at the beginning of this conversation where you're saying, well, what would you do, Greg, in this dictator thing going on to dismantle the tracks? I want to be so aware and so self-empowered that I either help create the Underground Railroad or I'm an absolute station of merit in the Underground Railroad. And I believe what you just said, that berserker energy, when mastered, it's like that samurai mastery. You become the warrior. And the intent isn't to kill and be a mad person. The intent is to be so strong that the continual action of helping people who need help can go on and on and on.
Yeah, it becomes generative, a self-fulfilling, energetic frequency.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we had the great sage Thich Nhat Hanh take us deeper, and this conversation's been way more stimulating than I thought it would. And in keeping with the weirdness of our times, while Greg was speaking, I asked Claude to write a poem about men and their sexual aggression and turning it into the promise of a healed world.
All right.
And so I will now read you, having not yet read what the AI created the poem of.
So we heard from
we go.
Thich Nhat Hanh, and now we're going to hear from Claude. All right.
All right. The Turning. In the quiet hours before dawn, when shame sits heavy as stone, men gather their scattered pieces. The boy who learned to take, the man who forgot how to ask. They trace the root systems of their own destruction, following anger back to its source. The first time someone said, "Boys, don't cry, take what you want," she was asking for it. With trembling hands, they begin the archaeology of their own hearts, unearthing tenderness buried beneath years of armor and entitlement. One by one, they learn the difference between power over and power with, between conquest and connection, between taking and receiving what is freely given. They practice apology like a new language, stumble over accountability, discover that vulnerability is not the opposite of strength, but its truest expression. In therapy circles, in late night conversations, in the mirror's honest gaze, they dismantle the machinery of harm piece by piece, replacing it with something softer, more sustainable. And slowly, like spring after the longest winter, the world begins to shift. Children grow up knowing their bodies are their own. Women walk streets without keys between fingers. Love becomes a practice of mutual flourishing. This is not redemption, it is transformation. Not erasure of the past, but the promise of tomorrow, a world where healing is more contagious than harm, where men choose to be guardians of what is sacred rather than conquerors of what is vulnerable. The work is never finished, but each day it begins again, this turning toward light, this choice to be. The ancestors future generations will thank rather than mourn.